On the evening of February 26, 2026, Steve Witkoff walked out of a hotel suite in Geneva. He had just finished a third round of nuclear negotiations with Iran. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi was in another room on another floor, communicating only through Omani intermediaries, the same indirect format the two sides had used for almost a year. Witkoff would later tell reporters the Iranians were stalling. Araghchi would say the Americans were making maximalist demands. 48 hours later, American B-2 bombers and Israeli F-35s were over Iranian airspace. This is the story of how the most studied, most negotiated, most warned about diplomatic problem of the 21st century broke down not once, but twice, and how even now, after a war that killed more than 1,200 people, the same diplomats are sitting in the same rooms in Muscat working on the same problem with the same disagreements that triggered the bombs in the first place. The question isn't whether diplomacy will be hard, it's why it keeps failing in the same way, and whether anyone in Washington and Tehran and Tel Aviv actually wants it to succeed. In April 2025, Donald Trump sent a letter to Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei. The letter offered direct negotiations and gave Iran 60 days to reach an agreement. It was, by the standards of U.S.-Iran communication, almost cordial. 12 days later, Steve Witkoff, a New York real estate developer, Trump's longtime friend and the administration's special envoy for the Middle East, flew to Muscat. He met an Iranian delegation led by Araghchi, a career diplomat, who had helped negotiate the original 2015 nuclear deal. They didn't meet in the same room. They sat in adjacent suites in a palace near Muscat International Airport, while Oman's foreign minister Badr al-Busaidi shuttled messages between them. What's remarkable, looking back, is how close they got. According to descriptions later confirmed by both sides, Iran offered something extraordinary in those early talks. Tehran said it would freeze its support for Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and the Iraqi militias. It would ship its highly enriched uranium stockpile to a third country Russia volunteered to take it. It would accept comprehensive IAEA inspections. In exchange, Iran wanted sanctions relief, a U.S. congressional ratification of any deal, and the right to continue some peaceful enrichment for civilian reactor fuel. Witkoff later said the Iranian proposals were constructive. Oman's foreign minister, who watched the talks from inside the room, said publicly that a deal is within our reach. For a few weeks in the spring of 2025, people who had spent their careers watching this issue allowed themselves to be cautiously hopeful. It didn't last. The breaking point was a single phrase: zero enrichment. The Trump administration, pressed by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and a hawkish wing of his own cabinet, hardened its position. Iran would not be permitted to enrich uranium at any level, not 3.5% for civilian fuel, not 5% nothing. Its enrichment facilities at Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan would have to be physically dismantled. Iran's missile program would have to be capped. Its regional alliances would have to end. For Iran, this wasn't a negotiating position. It was a demand for surrender. Under Article 4 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, every signatory has the right to peaceful nuclear energy. Iran, which has invested decades and billions of dollars in mastering the uranium fuel cycle, treats domestic enrichment as a matter of sovereignty. The 2015 deal that Trump tore up in 2018 had allowed Iran to enrich up to 3.67%. The new American position offered zero. Araghchi told reporters Iran could not accept the dismantling of our entire nuclear program in exchange for the lifting of sanctions that should never have been imposed. On June 12, 2025, the IAEA Board of Governors formally declared Iran in non-compliance with its obligations. The 60-day deadline expired the next day. That night, Israeli aircraft crossed the border. The 12-day war, as it came to be called, began at dawn on June 13, 2025, with what Israel named Operation Rising Lion. The opening salvo was extraordinary in its precision and its audacity. Within hours, more than 30 senior Iranian military commanders were dead. 11 nuclear scientists were killed in their homes, some in car bombings that bore the hallmarks of operations Israel had run inside Iran for more than a decade. The Chief of Staff of the Iranian Armed Forces, the head of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the commander of the IRGC Aerospace Force, all gone in the first 24 hours. Iran retaliated, as it always said it would, with the largest ballistic missile barrage in its history. Over 12 days, Iran fired roughly 550 ballistic missiles and 1,000 drones at Israel. The Israeli interception rate, layered between Arrow David's Sling and Patriot batteries backed by U.S. destroyers in the Mediterranean, hovered around 90%. but that meant about 1 in 10 got through. In Bat Yam, a coastal suburb south of Tel Aviv, an Iranian missile struck an apartment building on the night of June 14th. Among the 9 people killed, there were 5 members of a family from Ukraine: a mother, a father, 2 grandparents, and a 7-year-old girl named Anastasia. The family had come to Israel for Anastasia's cancer treatment. They had been in the country for less than a month. In Tehran, the Israeli strikes hit harder and longer. By the end of the war, according to human rights activists in Iran, a U.S.-based monitoring group, 1,190 people had been killed inside Iran. At least 436 were civilians. 65 were children. A 5-year-old boy in Asadabad. 3 Red Crescent aid workers. 2 doctors at Evin Prison's medical clinic killed in a strike on the prison itself. On June 22nd, the United States joined the war. American B-2 bombers flying nonstop from Missouri dropped GBU-57 bunker busters on the deeply buried enrichment facility at Fordow, on the centrifuge halls at Natanz, and on the tunnel complex at Isfahan that housed Iran's stockpile of 60% enriched uranium. Trump called the strikes spectacular and said Iran's nuclear program had been obliterated. It hadn't. What happened in the days before June 22nd has become the subject of one of the most consequential intelligence disputes of the decade. According to IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi, satellite imagery shows that on June 9th, 4 days before the war began, almost 2 weeks before the American strikes, 18 blue shipping containers were filmed entering a tunnel at the Isfahan complex. Those containers, Grossi believes, held roughly 200 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium. They are still there. The tunnels were sealed by the bombing, not destroyed. In April 2026, Grossi told Bloomberg Television that the material is accessible if there's a wish to go there. This is the central, uncomfortable fact of the post-war period. The strikes did not eliminate Iran's stockpile. They buried it. To understand why this conflict keeps returning to the same impasse, you have to understand how each side sees the other and how each side genuinely believes its position is the reasonable one. Start with Washington. The American argument, particularly as articulated by Witkoff and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, runs roughly as follows. Iran has been caught lying about its nuclear program for 30 years. It hid the Natanz facility until an exile group exposed it in 2002. It hid Fordow until Western intelligence agencies caught it in 2009. It enriched uranium to 60%, a level no country reaches except as a stepping stone to weapons grade, while claiming the program was peaceful. It is, by the IAEA's own assessment, the only non-nuclear weapon state in the world to enrich at that level. Trusting Iran with the right to enrich at any level in this view is trusting a country that has not earned trust. The Israeli argument adds a sharper edge. For Netanyahu and the Israeli security establishment, Iran's nuclear program is not a policy disagreement. It is an existential threat from a regime that has, for 45 years, called for Israel's destruction. Israeli intelligence has long believed that Iran's calculus is not whether to build a bomb, but when. From Tel Aviv's perspective, every month of negotiation is a month Iran uses to advance through new centrifuges, deeper bunkers, more dispersed sites. The 12-day war, in this view, was not a failure of diplomacy. It was diplomacy succeeding by other means. Now turn to Tehran. The Iranian argument is also coherent, and Americans who want to understand why these talks keep collapsing need to take it seriously. Iran has signed the NPT. It has not built a weapon. The 2015 nuclear deal, which Iran negotiated with the U.S., the U.K., France, Germany, Russia, and China, allowed Iran to enrich uranium to 67% and required intrusive IAEA monitoring. By every public account, including the U.S. intelligence community's own assessments, Iran was in compliance with that deal when, in May 2018, Donald Trump pulled the United States out of it and reimposed sanctions. In Tehran's view, Iran was the party that kept its word. Iran was the party that was punished for keeping its word. Iran's enrichment beyond 60% began in 2021 after years of U.S. sanctions and Israeli sabotage at Natanz, including the Stuxnet computer worm, the Mossad theft of nuclear archives, and the assassinations of Iranian scientists. Most famously, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, killed by a remote-controlled machine gun in 2020. Even before the June 2025 strikes, Tehran had reasons to distrust the United States. After the strikes, those reasons hardened into something deeper. The country's supreme leader was killed. Its military leadership was decapitated. Its capital was bombed for 12 days. Whatever you think of the Islamic Republic, and many of its own citizens think very little of it, It now holds the position that any deal which does not preserve domestic enrichment is, in Araghchi's words, a deal of surrender, not negotiation. There is also the structural problem that has haunted Iran nuclear diplomacy since 2015. Even if the U.S. and Iran reach an agreement, Tehran has watched what happens to American treaties between presidents. Why would Iran dismantle physical infrastructure, concrete buildings, centrifuge cascades, mountain bunkers, in exchange for sanctions relief that the next administration could revoke in an afternoon? The 2015 deal did not require Iran to dismantle anything. The 2026 American demand requires exactly that. This is the architecture of the impasse. Each side believes the other is asking it to surrender. Each side believes the other has historically proven untrustworthy, and each side has by its own lights evidence to support that belief. After the June 2025 ceasefire talks resumed, slowly, painfully, both sides had reasons to come back. Iran was bleeding economically, its proxies were diminished, its leadership was in transition. The United States, for all of Trump's obliteration rhetoric, had not actually solved the problem. The uranium was still in the mountain. The fourth and fifth rounds of talks in early 2026 looked different from the spring 2025 rounds. The American team now included Admiral Brad Cooper, the head of U.S. Central Command, in his dress whites sitting at the table in Muscat, while a U.S. carrier strike group led by the USS Abraham Lincoln operated off the Iranian coast. This was the administration-argued peace through strength. To the Iranian delegation, it looked like a gun on the table. By the third round of post-war talks in February 2026 in Geneva, both sides had moved. Iran reportedly offered in writing to blend down its 60% stockpile to lower enrichment levels, a major concession. It offered to limit any future enrichment to a small number of advanced centrifuges used only to fuel research reactors. It offered comprehensive IAEA inspections. The Arms Control Association, a Washington-based nonprofit that has reviewed transcripts of the briefings Witkoff gave to American think tank experts after the talks concluded. Something striking, the American team did not appear to understand the technical proposal Iran had made. According to the association's analysis, Witkoff dismissed Iran's offer as stalling, interpreting Iran's emphasis on reactor fuel as evidence of bad faith. The association argued the opposite, that Iran was making the most serious counteroffer it had made in 15 years, and that an experienced negotiator would have recognized it. Whether that assessment is right or wrong, the talks ended without agreement. 2 days later, U.S. and Israeli aircraft struck Iranian targets again. Iran retaliated with missile and drone strikes on Israeli territory. The war that had supposedly ended in June 2025 had in fact only paused. A conditional 2-week ceasefire brokered by Pakistan in early April 2026 brought the parties back to the table once more. Pakistan's prime minister announced that a 10-point Iranian framework formed a workable basis for renewed talks. Trump said publicly that he was not thrilled with progress. Araghchi said an agreement was just inches away, but that the United States was making maximalist demands. If you are reading this in the United States in late spring 2026, this is where things stand. The bombs are paused, the diplomats are talking, the uranium is in the mountain, and the same disagreement that broke the talks in May 2025, whether Iran can enrich uranium at any level on its own soil, is the disagreement that defines the talks in May 2026. Here is what makes this story so hard to tell. Honestly, a deal is not impossible. It is not even technically that complicated. It requires 3 things, and all 3 are in principle available. First, Iran would have to accept genuinely intrusive monitoring, not the limited inspections it accepted in 2015, but full implementation of the IAEA's additional protocol, which permits short-notice inspections of any facility declared or undeclared. This is something Iran has at various points indicated it could accept. Second, the United States would have to accept that Iran will continue some form of domestic enrichment capped at low levels with all enriched material above a defined threshold shipped abroad. This is essentially the architecture of the 2015 deal. It is the architecture multiple countries, including hawkish Persian Gulf states, have privately told the Trump administration they could live with. Third, and this is the hardest piece, the deal would need credibility beyond the term of a single American president. In 2015, the Obama administration tried to address this by getting UN Security Council endorsement. Trump pulled out anyway. Any future deal would need to be ratified by the U.S. Senate, which means it would need to clear a 67-vote threshold in a chamber where Iran is one of the most polarizing issues in American politics. No administration has been willing to spend the political capital to attempt this. There are smart people in Washington and Tehran who have privately mapped out versions of this deal. They know what it looks like. The technical work is largely done. What does not exist is a political constituency in either country willing to pay the costs of accepting it. In Washington, Republicans who could deliver Senate votes have made opposition to any Iran deal a defining position. In Tehran, the post-war regime wounded embarrassed, and now led by a younger Khamenei whose legitimacy depends on being seen as harder than his father, cannot be seen accepting American restrictions on Iranian sovereignty. So, a deal is technically achievable, and politically, in both capitals, almost impossible. This is the meaning of the phrase, diplomacy failed. It does not mean that no diplomats are talking, or that no agreement is theoretically possible. It means the political systems on both sides have evolved in ways that make ratification harder than confrontation. The bombing campaigns are in a sense easier than the alternative. 3 scenarios, all plausible, all visible from where we sit right now. The first is what we might call the long stalemate. Iran does not openly weaponize. The United States does not strike again. Inspectors return to some sites and not others. The 440 kilograms of uranium remain entombed at Isfahan, occasionally discussed, never moved. Sanctions remain. Oil flows at reduced volumes through the Strait of Hormuz. American carrier groups rotate through the Persian Gulf. Israeli aircraft conduct periodic exercises over the Mediterranean. This is in fact the most likely outcome, not because anyone wants it, but because it requires the least decision-making from any party. It is the path of inertia. The second scenario is escalation. If Iran moves the uranium, if those 18 blue containers are seen by satellite leaving the Isfahan tunnel, the United States and Israel will almost certainly strike again and harder. If Iran weaponizes, the strikes will become a sustained campaign. The military estimates of what such a campaign would cost are sobering tens of thousands of casualties on both sides. Oil shocks that could push global prices above $200 a barrel, retaliation against U.S. bases in the Gulf, where roughly 40,000 American service members are stationed. This is the scenario that keeps Pentagon planners awake. The third scenario is the one almost no one is discussing publicly: a real deal. Not a perfect deal. Not a deal either side will love. A deal in which Iran accepts capped enrichment plus intrusive monitoring the United States, accepts that complete dismantlement is not achievable, and both sides eat domestic political costs in exchange for not fighting another war. The contours of this deal exist on the desks of the Oman Foreign Ministry. They have existed there for months. The fact that this third scenario seems remote, that it requires courage neither Tehran nor Washington has shown willingness to spend, is itself the answer to the question this video opened with. Why does Iran nuclear diplomacy keep failing? It fails because the political costs of succeeding are higher than the political costs of failing. That is a brutal sentence to write. It is also as best as anyone can tell the truth. The IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi said something in April 2026 that didn't get the attention it deserved. Asked about the prospects for a new agreement, he said, "Without IAEA verification, you don't have an agreement. You have an illusion of an agreement." He could have said the same thing about every Iran nuclear deal of the last 25 years. Each one collapsed not because the technical work was wrong, but because at least one of the parties decided in the end that confrontation was politically safer than commitment. The question for American viewers, for anyone watching this from the United States, is not whether the next deal will succeed. It is whether the political system that produces our negotiators is capable of producing a negotiator who can sell a deal, defend it, and pass it through the institutions that make American commitments durable. The answer right now is not obvious. In the meantime, talks continue. Bombs are paused. Anastasia and her family are buried in Bat Yam. The 5-year-old in Asadabad is buried in Asadabad. The 440 kilograms of uranium sit in the mountain. And the men in suits sit in the palace in Muscat, communicating through intermediaries, working on a problem that has now killed more than 1,200 people across 2 countries, and could, if anyone gets it wrong, kill many, many more. If you found this useful, leave a comment with one question: do you think a deal is still possible? And if so, what would it actually take? The comments are the most useful part of this channel, and I read them. Thank you for watching.